In Denmark in 1987, an older woman was assaulted and murdered in her own apartment. This would soon lead to several attacks, rapes, and murders, all committed by the same man. But this man would end up being 23 years on the loose before a phone call changed everything. This is the disturbing case of the Amager man. So hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Elin and on this channel I cover true crime cases that have occurred in the Nordic countries. Some content warnings before we start this video. This video will include talks about sexual assault and rape, so if that's something that you don't want to watch, then I suggest you click out of this video right now. I also want to mention before I start that some of the victims have not been named in the media, and I'm guessing that this is because of their own privacy, so I'm also not gonna mention their names in the video. Some of the victims have been named in the media, and I'm gonna be using their first names in this video. This is mostly because I can't ask them if they want to be fully named in the video, and the crimes are mostly of sexual nature, so I'm trying to be respectful. Some people might think that it's silly, but I'm gonna do it this way. With that being said, now let's get into the case that happened in Denmark. On the 15th of February 1987 at 7:30 p.m., the 73-year-old widow Edith's upstairs neighbor was starting to get pretty frustrated and annoyed. And this was because the sound on Edith's TV for some reason suddenly turned up. So the neighbor decided to call Edith to complain, but she did not pick up and eventually the neighbor just gave up the efforts. The next day, a smell of gas was starting to leak out in the stairway of the apartment building, and this was all coming from Edith's apartment. So the neighbors started knocking on her door but got no reply, so they eventually got worried and decided to call the police. The police came to the scene and broke down Edith's door, and inside they found that the apartment had been completely ransacked. In the kitchen, 2 gas taps had been opened, and this was the reason for the strong smell throughout the apartment building. Outside of the kitchen, a lit candle was still on the table, so it was clear that someone wanted a gas explosion to occur. So they put out the candle and continued their way throughout the apartment, and they soon found Edith dead, wrapped up in a carpet. She had been knocked out and strangled to death, and the murderer had also stolen jewelry from her. So the investigation started, and they pretty much straight away believed that the person who had murdered Edith had also turned up the volume on the TV the night before, and this was probably so that he could carry out the attack without disturbing the neighbors. They concluded that the gas taps had been opened at around 10:30 the next morning, and this suggested that the killer had either spent the whole night there after murdering Edith, or then he had returned the following day. A young man working for a moving company was soon a suspect in the case, as he had helped Edith move some furniture only a month before her murder, and this man was called Marcel Hansen. Marcel Lychau Hansen was born on the 2nd of October 1965 in Denmark, and he was the third out of 4 siblings. During the first years of his life, the family lived in a newly built apartment building, but the family moved to a detached house when this space got too small. The childhood home was apparently safe. The family gathered every day for dinner together, and sometimes the children's friends would join them for dinner. So it seemed like Marcel had a pretty good and regular upbringing, and he attended school, but according to his friends, he was not very book smart. Friends from his childhood describe him as unpredictable, fearless, and aggressive, as he never backed away from a fight even if his opponent was older or bigger than him. Some people described him as the alpha male in his group, and many people in school feared him. But he also had a very charming side and was very good at playing football. As a teenager, Marcel started doing small crimes such as stealing cigarettes. But this soon turned into bigger crimes as he started breaking into private houses and robbing them. He would sometimes even sneak into the victims' bedrooms and steal things from their bedside tables while they were sleeping right next to him, which is just so creepy. I mean, imagine waking up realizing that someone has been right next to you while you were sleeping and you did not wake up or realize anything. And friends have actually stated that he seemed like he enjoyed doing these kind of things. As an adult, Marcel Marcel played football and he was an active member in the Sunday Ball Club and was also a football coach for a team in his town. As I said, in the 1980s, Marcel was working in the furniture moving business for a company. In 1984, he was caught with a rifle in the trunk of his car and he was charged for that. And considering the fact that he had committed crimes like this before, the police were pretty suspicious of him when they found out that he had a connection to Edith. The investigators had also found a shoe print in her apartment matching the size and type of shoe that he had. He was questioned and they knew that he was probably guilty, but he actually had an alibi for the day after the murder, so the time that he would have been in Edith's apartment when the gas tab was opened. So the police just kept on looking for another killer and they had to let him go. Shortly after this, Marcel went to a friend who bought and sold stolen jewelry and sold him a bunch of jewelry. This friend soon saw a picture of Edith in a magazine and realized that she was wearing a necklace that Marcel had sold to him. So at this point he knew that Marcel had a connection to Edith's murder, but he decided not to say anything to the police, mostly because he did not want them to check his own illegal business. The police at this point did not realize that the time they had calculated that the gas tab was opened had actually been incorrect. And this would soon end up leading to another very tragic event. 3 years after Edith's murder, on the 29th of August 1990, the 40-year-old schoolteacher Lene was out riding her bike. She had taken a nature park trip and had bought a pair of binoculars as she wanted to study birds. And the sun was shining, so it was the perfect day for this kind of activity. But when she did not return home that evening, her husband notified the police. The following day, a police search was started, and this included cadaver dogs and helicopters. On the 3rd of September, so after 5 days of searching, the police helicopter found her bicycle left by a tree in the nature park, and later that day her body was found not far away from the bike. Lene was found under some branches and she had been raped and strangled to death. Her killer had also stolen her silver ring and her watch, and at this point in time it was believed that this was some kind of trophies from the attack. The police actually found DNA from the semen found on Lene's clothes and body, but it couldn't be matched to a perpetrator since there was no database back then. So they questioned over 700 people, and the public was also asked to call in with any sort of information. A man who had been doing some bike training that day in the area called in, and he said that he saw a person who turned away when he passed on his bike, but he could not tell if this was a man or a woman, and the police had laughed at him and answered, "If that's the case, then you should probably wear glasses." So the caller actually got angry as he thought that the policeman was being rude, and he ended up hanging up the phone call. And this was actually a huge deal because before he got angry, he never had the time to tell the police officer about the other person that he saw in the park that day. If he would have stayed on this phone call, he would have told the police officer that during his bike ride that day, he actually met his old classmate, Marcel Hansen. So the police never got information about the fact that Marcel had been in the area that Lene was murdered in on the day of her murder. Because of this, the police had no leads and the case soon went cold. And honestly, it just makes me so angry that if the police would have just handled the situation differently and just treated this man with a little bit more respect, then the case would have probably been solved right then and there. 5 years after Lene's murder, on the 19th of December 1995, a 23-year-old woman was visiting her sister in her villa. Her sister left for work early that morning and the woman was just left sleeping in the bedroom of the house. In the house on the bottom floor, there was 3 teenage girls sleeping. The 15-year-old girl who lived there was actually living with her mother, but the mother was not at home and she had her 2 friends, another 15-year-old girl and one 14-year-old sleeping over. And I was a bit confused about this at first, but it seems like it was a shared house with 2 floors, so the teenage girls were on the ground floor while the 23-year-old was sleeping on the first floor. At some point during that morning, a man crawled into the house through a basement window. He forced himself into the 23-year-old woman's bedroom and dragged her down to the basement at knife point. The younger girls woke up and were of course all terrified while he tied their hands and pulled pillowcases over their heads. He did this so that they could not see his face, and he also demanded the code to one of their bank cards. The man then unfortunately forced one of the 14-year-old girls to the bathroom where he raped her. He told the others that if they tried to escape, then he would kill her, so they were just too scared to do anything. They were all completely shocked and terrified, and he ended up taking all of them one by one to the upstairs bathroom to rape them. When he was done, he demanded their names and addresses and stole jewelry from the house before he left them tied up in the basement. He had been there for 2 hours and he had been wearing gloves, so there was no fingerprints in the house. But he had taken off the gloves while he was tying the girl's hands, and he had left both the rope and a knife in the house, so he did leave some evidence behind. And this was stored for future technology, and it would actually take 15 years before the evidence would end up leading them to the perpetrator. So the case went unsolved at the time, but I bet we all know who the perpetrator was at this point. On the 3rd of May 2005, a student heard a scream coming from another student's dorm room at Amager College in Denmark. The student next door, who was a 24-year-old woman, soon stopped screaming, and the student who heard the screaming just forgot about it. Little did she know that in the room next door, a man had broken into the 24-year-old's dorm room. He forced her to wear a blindfold, threatened her with a knife, and raped her for around 2 hours. He also told her, and I quote, "If you get a glimpse of my face, I will kill you," so she was of course frightened. The man repeatedly raped her, and he also forced her to pick what kind of assault he would commit towards her before he forced her into the shower to wash all of the traces away. The man then drank some milk from her fridge and took the bedsheets off from her bed before leaving the room. Before he left the room, he told her, "If you tell anyone about this, I will bring my friend the next time." So this man thought that he had made the perfect assault, but he had made one big mistake that he did not realize. When he drank from the woman's fridge, he drank straight from the milk package. So this left his DNA on it, but it was a mixture of both his and hers DNA, so it could not be used to search for a match in the database since this now existed. Basically, the DNA could only be used if they already had a suspect and they tested that with the DNA from the milk package. So the man was not caught and was free to continue his assaults. On the 22nd of July, a 47-year-old woman was pulled into a green area by a man at the Vangede church. During this assault, the man took off her belt and wrapped it around her neck while forcing her into oral sex. During the whole time of the rape, he strangled her with the belt, and that's pretty much all the information that I could find about this. This assault actually went unsolved since the police never really connected this to any suspect, but many people believe that this was another victim of the Amager man, so that's why I wanted to bring it into this video. On the 25th of September 2010, a 17-year-old girl called Mandy was threatened with a knife, assaulted, and raped at a garden. Mandy had been out with her friends that night, and at around 4 in the morning she had been walking the 500 meters from the metro station to her parents' garden house. She was listening to music at the same time, singing along and minding her own business. A man passed her on the street and she felt pretty embarrassed since she thought that he probably heard her sing. Just a few seconds later, she heard footsteps behind her, and before she had time to react, someone grabbed her from behind. She started kicking and screaming and tried her everything to get away from this man, but he was completely ice cold and did not care, and he actually told her, "Drop it, it's not over yet." Mandy had actually grabbed her phone and called her mother during this attack, and she had just shouted in the phone call, "I don't wanna die." But the man soon realized what was happening, and of course he ended the phone call. After that, he raped her twice using a condom, and during this time her parents were frantically trying to call her back. And it's so sad that during this time she was only around 300 meters away from them, and they just had no clue where she was. The man then told her to count to 3,000 and left the scene, and of course her family contacted the police straight away when they got to know what happened. While fleeing the scene, the perpetrator actually dropped a condom only a few meters away from the place of the attack. So this was sent in for further testing, and on the 21st of October 2010, the test results came back with some shocking news. The police realized that the DNA on the condom was identical to the one found on the milk package in the 2005 rape, as well as that on Lene's body in 1990. So they now had a DNA profile and knew that the cases were connected, but they did not have a suspect yet. So they once again asked the public to step forward, and just a few days after this, a woman called in with some news. This was actually the mother of the man who had called the police around 20 years earlier, who hung up the phone after the policeman was being rude to him. She told them that in 1990 her son had been in the area where Lene was murdered and had stumbled across his old classmate, a man called Marcel Hansen. So the police immediately knew that they needed to question him and take his DNA. On the 12th of November 2010, the results came back. It was a match and Marcel Hansen was arrested. But he was at this point only charged with 2 rapes and Lene's murder, and the police now started looking into similar unsolved cases. And remember in the beginning when I said that the police looked into him in connection to Edith's murder, but he was freed because he had an alibi for the morning after when the gas tab was turned on? The police now, 23 years after the murder, realized that their calculations had been wrong and the gas tab could have actually been turned on straight after the murder. This meant that Marcel no longer had an alibi and could have been involved in this case as well. Around the same time, Marcel's friend who bought some of the stolen jewelry also came forward saying that Marcel sold him Edith's necklace. Around this time, he was also connected to the rape of the 4 girls in the house, since the DNA from the knife was connected to him. In the end, he was charged with 7 rapes and 2 murders, but he was acquitted on the rape of the 47-year-old woman outside of the church due to lack of evidence. So Marcel Hansen's trial began in the Copenhagen City Court on the 2nd of November 2011. He pleaded not guilty to all charges, and the prosecutor demanded life imprisonment while the defendant asked for a suspended sentence. 2 days before Christmas in 2011, Marcel Hansen was deemed guilty of 2 murders and 6 rapes. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and he did not appeal this sentence. When Marcel left the courtroom, one of the victim's fathers got up and screamed, "There you go, you pig. Merry Christmas." But the story does not really end here, since Marcel had another plan that he was hiding. On the 15th of December 2011, it became known to the police that Marcel had smuggled letters with his own semen from prison. His son's girlfriend actually ended up delivering 4 letters to the police after she had found them and been suspicious towards what was going on. Marcel had sent a total of 8 letters to his son with semen, saliva, and hair wrapped in diaper covers, instructing his own son to assault a random woman and put his DNA on her body. He had even written instructions in one of the letters, and I quote, "Do not kill anyone for me, at most knock someone out and plant the DNA." That way the police would find his DNA on a woman while he was still in prison. And according to him, this would prove that there was another person with the same DNA as his, and this would make his sentence invalid. They ended up being charged for this, but their sentences were dismissed in court. Marcel actually admitted that the DNA was his, but he was not given an additional sentence as he's already serving the highest possible sentence in Danish law. But if he would ever be put up for parole, then this might become relevant. What's crazy about this case is that in 1988, so the year after his first known attack and murder of Edith, Marcel actually found himself a girlfriend. They ended up living together for around 20 years and had 2 children together before they separated in 2007. This means that during almost all of his attacks, he was living a double life and having a family at the same time as he was being this rapist and murderer. As I said, he was also a football coach, and he was actually well liked within this whole football community. His colleagues have stated that they had discussed the rapes and murders that were happening in the area, and Marcel had stated, "I hope they catch him one day. That bastard should have his balls cut off and then be thrown in a hole. and I can't help but wondering if he still feels the same way. He had also urged some of the younger football players' parents to pick them up after practice, as he had stated, who knows what could happen to them. Marcel has later been called the Amager man in the Danish media, since this is the area where most of the attacks happened, and he's probably Denmark's most dangerous sex offender. He's also believed to possibly be connected to other murder cases. In summer of 1990, a 28-year-old called Annette was seen going into her apartment building, followed by a man. After that, the witnesses heard arguments and saw a man running away from the apartment building. Annette had been stabbed to death with 28 stab wounds, and the case has never been solved. And there was a connection between Annette and Marcel, as they had met only a couple of weeks before the murder. Another unsolved case that is believed to be connected to Marcel is the murder of 18-year-old Stine. She was murdered in her own basement in 1990, and apparently Marcel had been in the area that exact same night and disappeared for a couple of hours. On her body, the letters V and A were engraved, which is a symbol that people from a certain area in Denmark used, and guess who grew up in that area? Marcel Hansen. Many people have also reported being sexually assaulted and believe that it was Marcel, but this has never been proven. But that's all that I have for today's case, and I know that it was a lot of information to go through, but I wanted to include everything. In the end, I'm just happy that Marcel was caught and got the sentence that he deserved. I mean, better late than never. Anyway, I hope that you have a great rest of your day and that I will see you in my next case. And my next case will actually be a Halloween related case, so I'm super excited about that. Thank you so much for watching and stay safe out there. Goodbye, everyone.